Cabo Verde and the transatlantic slave trade, the Atlantic crossroads of human trafficking. How a remote island chain became central to one of history's most inhuman economies. At the confluence of European ambition and African suffering lies the story of Cabo, an archipelago once seen as a remote outpost and, yet pivotal to the rise of a global system of forced labor and imperial expansion, situated just 570 kilometers off the West African coast. Cabo Verde served as a maritime warehouse, relay station. Cabo Verde's geographic and logistical role in the global slave economy made it a silent but crucial accomplice in the forced migration of millions of Africans past. Cultural, demographic, and moral legacies remain deeply felt today, and human processing point for the transatlantic slave trade for over 300 years. That absence of native populations made the archipelago ideal for European colonization. By 1462, the Portuguese had established a permanent settlement on Santiago Island, laying the groundwork for a colonial economy geared toward maritime trade, though often left out of dominant narratives of slavery and empire, from discovery to domination. Strategic islands in a new world order. It coincided with Portugal's growing involvement in the African slave trade, and Cabo Verde's location, roughly halfway between West Africa and Brazil, soon turned it into a key logistics hub within a transoceanic network. When Portuguese and Genoese explorers reached Cabo Verde in the mid-15th century, they found the islands uninhabited. But this was no isolated development. Cabo Verde as a slave transit and processing center during the height of the 16th to 18th centuries. The islands became a staging ground for human trafficking. Portuguese slavers purchased or captured Africans on the mainland from places like Senegal, Guinea-Bissau, and Sierra Leone and transported them to Cabo Verde. Intermarriage, forced unions, and cultural blending gave rise to a population of mixed African and Portuguese descent. Here, captives were often Cabo Verde's entire social identity today is deeply rooted in this fusion born of trauma, survival, and adaptation. Sorted and warehoused in coastal towns like Ribeira Grande, branded and baptized, sometimes forcefully, and later shipped en masse to plantations in Brazil, the Caribbean, or Spanish colonies in the Americas. Over time, Cabo Verde transformed from a supply point into a commercial processing zone for enslaved humans, a midway space between capture and the brutal destinations of plantation slavery. Cultural and demographic transformation. As slavers, merchants, and African captives, the islands became home to a Creole society unlike any other in the Atlantic. Portugal formally abolished slavery in its colonies in 18, though illegal trade continued for some years after. This blending birthed Cape Verdean Creole, a distinct language, as well as hybrid traditions in music, religious practice, cuisine, and storytelling. Economic value and imperial strategy. The islands suffered frequent famine, drought, and neglect, leading to massive emigrational trend that continues today. But the social hierarchies, land ownership patterns, and inequities rooted in the slave era would echo through generations. Cabo Verde's role wasn't limited to trafficking. It was also a safe harbor for ships navigating treacherous Atlantic routes, a resupply station for food, water, and repairs, and a relay point for communications between Lisbon and colonial outposts in Africa and South America. As a silent crossroads in the slave trade, it reminds us that colonialism was not only built on conquest but also on logistics, complicity, and commodification of human life. While the islands themselves lacked plantations or gold mines, their value lay in logistics, making them vital to the Portuguese Empire's expansion and maintenance. Cabo Verde was one such place. Decline of the trade and lingering inequality. The transatlantic slave trade began to decline in the early 19th century, as abolitionist movements gained ground and maritime enforcement increased. By then, Cabo Verde's economic relevance had diminished. Memory, resistance, and recognition. In recent years, there has been a cultural and scholarly reckoning with this history. Cidade, Velha, the former capital and slave port, was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2009. Museums, festivals, and local historians are reviving stories of resistance, marooned communities, and the dignity of ancestors who endured enslavement. Across the diaspora in Portugal, the US, the Netherlands, and Angola, Cape Verdeans reflect on their hybrid heritage and the cost of empire. Today, Cabo Verde's identity is inseparable from this legacy, one of forced movement, cultural resilience, and unspoken pain. Cabo Verde's role in a shared Atlantic tragedy. Cabo Verde may be a small island nation, but its role in shaping the transatlantic world was disproportionately large. To understand the Atlantic slave trade in full, we must include the ports in between, not just where the ships started or ended, but where people waited, suffered, and were transformed forever.